When you live in a small town, a breakup can seem like the end of the world as you know it. Hiding spots are few and far between, and everyone wants to know if you're alright. Well, spoiler alert, I'm not. I couldn't go to the coffee shop without the barista asking me how I was doing, or having a drink with my friends without them trying to set me up with some rando sitting alone at the bar. I had been with Emily since high school, and we were engaged to be married for almost a year and a half. Everything was going perfectly in my life, or so I thought. I had finally snagged the career I'd always wanted. We put down a payment on a nice little house. We both had a close relationship with our families, so I made sure that the house was an equal distance from our respective parents' homes. This would be a huge help to us since Emily was pregnant. Not only was visiting family convenient for both of us, but having grandparents close by for free daycare would be ideal. I was so happy, excited, getting things ready, and letting my wife-to-be plan everything for her dream wedding. The only problem is, I was having some medical issues and was asked by my doctor to get an ultrasound. Upon getting said ultrasound, it was brought to my attention that I am, and have always been, infertile, which was heartbreaking and earth-shattering for more than one reason. Obviously, I was devastated that I would never be able to have a child, but that came with the crippling realization that my soon-to-be wife was not carrying my child. And since Jesus is the only virgin birth I've ever known about, process of elimination told me that my fiancé was unfaithful. She had, in fact, hooked up with her co-worker, Dustin, a chronically enfeebled but muscularly toned douchebag, multiple times since maybe 3 years ago, if my calculations are correct. Which means 3 out of the 4 years that we've been together, she's been contentedly cheating on me without raising my suspicions even once. Worst of all, I would have gladly raised their child as my own had it not been for the paper in front of me, affirming that I've been shooting blanks this whole time. Long story short, I took the breakup hard. I lost the house we were closing on, and my now ex-fiancé is basically condemned as the Hester Prynne of our suburban town. To top it all off, my ex is living with the man she committed this heinous act of infidelity with. She hadn't missed a beat. Moving on as if nothing had happened, other than being socially shamed everywhere she goes. I, on the other hand, have been a wreck, avoiding social gatherings and sleeping as much as possible. That is, when I could even fall asleep at all. It would be an understatement to say that I needed to get away from reality for a while, and the only thing I could think of was going to visit my former college roommate / best friend, Chet, out of state. I always find road trips to be my best escape from what stresses me out. When we were in college and one of us was going through a hard time or a breakup, we would always go for a hike on the rocks near campus. We would climb to the flats near the top of the lookout and drink a couple of beers while spouting off what we couldn't stand about our relationships, or just vent about life in general. After we got it all out, we would play these mixtapes that we'd recorded on actual cassettes through an old beat-up boombox Chet got from his older brother. We would lay on the rocks, not saying a word, just listening to the music and looking up at the sky. In those moments, the world just kind of disappeared. It was all very therapeutic. Yes, getting out of state seemed like the best way to get my mind off this toxic town. So, there I was, my bags scattered across the passenger seat of my 1972 Chevy El Camino. There was nothing but the road and my thoughts to keep me company with what seemed like a million miles to go, and this heartache was swelling in my chest. I've never heard this way before. I've become so fixated on the breakup that I can't seem to stop replaying my fictitious account of the night she cheated on me. I wasn't there, I never saw it, but I play a movie in my head over and over again of her infidelity. The look on the guy's face, the way she was dressed, even the look and the smell of the room. I needed to distract myself, looking around the car for anything that could occupy my mind, but keep my eyes on the road. I glanced down at the car radio, thinking to myself how infrequently it works, but at this point I was desperate. The highway was lonely, and only further reminded me of how lonely I truly was. It was as if I was the only car on the road. I could look on as far as I could see with no sign of another vehicle in either direction. It was like my own personal hell, being stuck in that car alone with my imagination riding shotgun. I turned on the radio, which was mostly static and some scratchy sounding vocals here and there as I tried to tune in a signal. I couldn't seem to pick any station up at all. I skimmed from one end of the dial to the other, trying to find anything more than just an occasional crackled music or the hiss of empty white noise. That's when I heard what seemed to be someone speaking, like maybe a talk show or even a sports interview. Heck, at this point, I would listen to NPR if it would get my mind on something else. I fidgeted with the tuner, trying to lock in a radio station when, all at once, the voice became clear. It was strange and sounded gravelly, but was undoubtedly male. The tone of the voice was distorted and deep as it uttered the words, "When your time comes, you'll be gone." Fear gripped me like darkness on a moonlit night as the words exited the radio speakers. And just then, my car hit a massive pothole. I inadvertently heaved the wheel into the other lane. My eyes glazed over as I caught a glimpse of headlights coming straight for me. I couldn't even see the driver in all this disarray, but they laid on their horn as I came within inches of driving headlong into the side of their vehicle. My car skidded past them, rolling onto the gravel alongside the road. Getting my wits about me enough to hit the brakes, I managed to stop before flying into a ditch. I looked up, realising that night had quickly arrived. I had completely lost track of time and my surroundings while messing with that radio. I glanced at the clock and saw that it was 8:30 p.m, but I could have sworn that it wasn't even 6 o'clock. I remembered checking the time just before trying to find the radio station to get an idea of how much longer I'd be driving. I completely ignored the signs and missed the exit I was supposed to take. I wasn't even sure where I was, but quickly checking with my phone's GPS, I could see that I had gone at least half an hour past the exit I needed to take. This was completely unlike me. I had driven this road dozens of times in college, and it didn't feel like that much time had gone by. Could I really have been distracted with the radio for that long? To make matters worse, a dense fog was rolling over the hills and towards the highway. The fog was thick like a heavy smoke, sticking fast to the asphalt. The bluish-grey mist obstructed the sky and surrounded my car as if I was being walled in. I threw the car in reverse and sped away from the roadside, racing down the highway to outrun it, but it appeared to be settling in from all directions. I needed to get to that exit, but my window of opportunity was closing quickly. I couldn't see anything behind me through the fog, barely able to make out my own taillights, let alone another car. The ominous wall of cloud surrounded my vehicle, and I lost all visibility. My headlights were useless in this case, completely smothered by the haze. I was reduced to a snail's pace, trying to find any indication that I was headed in the right direction. The radio static made for an eerie background tone to the already unsettling atmosphere around me. I felt like the lone survivor in a horror movie, trying to escape from that stereotypical death cabin in the woods were being defied by nature itself as I fled the scene. I turned the radio off so I could listen for any cars coming. I wanted to concentrate on the road. If nothing else, this fog had gotten my mind off my breakup. I inched along in silence, but the longer I drove, the harder it was to see. So much so that even the guardrail faded from view. The undaunting silence filled me with an existential dread. I didn't know how close to the exit I was, but I prayed for a street lamp or a car light to manifest in front of me. Imprisoned by the fog, I put the driver's side window down to listen for any sign of the freeway. The night was deathly quiet as I rode on in the cover of darkness, my mind on the edge. And that was when I heard a faint voice come across the car radio, just like the voice from earlier, but much softer, as though it were far away, not quite a whisper, just a voice in the distance. Its tone was gruff and sounded aggravated. Then the thought came to me. My radio was off. I looked down at the dial as the broadcast voice continued in the car speakers, but the radio was in fact off. I stopped the car and I leaned closer to the speakers. The voice was undoubtedly coming from there, but how? I turned on the radio to drown out the voice with the static, but the static hissing from before was gone. I could hear the voice growing louder as I turned up the volume. It was sharp and austere, very cold, as though trying to chastise me. The malevolent orator repeated the phrase, "You are not the only traveller who has yet to pay his debt. But when your time comes, you'll be gone." The words made no sense, but they alarmed me. The anxiety those words brought with them was like nothing I'd felt before. I looked up from the radio into the murky fog again, and I began to hear the voice coming through my window as well. "You are not the only traveller who has yet to pay his debt. But when your time comes, you'll be gone." My eyes became fixated on something in the fog. Through it was too thick to see anything before. I could still detect the outline of a figure forming up ahead. Somehow, this shadowy figure broke through the dense haze and it crept through the darkness. Strangely enough, the creature felt familiar. What was I saying? I don't know what was going on here, but I wondered where these thoughts were coming from. How could I recognize something like this? I'd never been in a situation like this before. For all I know, that's a hitchhiker up ahead, trying not to get hit by a car in this hazy evening. You are not the only traveller who has yet to pay his debt. But when your time comes, you'll be gone. The voice continued. I stared on into the fog, mesmerised by the figure. I began to drive again, moving towards the shadowy being. I had to get a better look. I had to know who or what was in front of me, and I felt a lot safer in the comfort of my locked car. The closer I got, the louder the voice became. It seemed angrier and was getting increasingly violent. I was driving along slowly, keeping my focus on the figure ahead. The thing in the fog started to walk in my direction, closing in on my car. I increased speed, and I could feel my hands shaking on the wheel. I could smell my fear. I was sweating and uneasy. I never took my eyes off the creature though. I tried to resolve to myself that this was nothing to worry about. Just a hitchhiker or even a police officer trying to direct traffic away from an accident. It could be anything. It could be literally anything, I told myself. Finally, I saw it for what it was. It wasn't a monster or a hitchhiker, and it certainly wasn't a police officer. The figure came into focus, and it was undeniably my ex-fiancée, Emily. No more than a few feet away from my car stood my ex, and she was holding a baby. The baby I thought was ours. The baby born as a result of her unfaithfulness. The baby I thought I would never meet. Something was wrong though. She was filthy, covered in mud and dirt. Her hair was matted together and her clothes were tattered, even torn in spots. The baby was covered in blood, not like it was hurt, but as though it was fresh from the womb. Did she just have the baby on the roadside? Why was she out here of all places? Why was she so dirty? I parked the car and tried to run to her side. The fog was heavy and wet. It was unyielding as I ran through it. I forced my way to Emily, but the palpable fog pressed against me as if to force me back. I asked if she was okay, but I could tell that she wasn't. She didn't say a word. She just stared at me with an empty expression. Her eyes were milky and her skin had a greyish hue to it. Most unsettling thing was her smile. It was a hardened smirk, like it was chiselled from stone, almost as if she were a statue. I looked down at the baby crying in her arms. She had a boy. Our baby was a boy, well, her baby, their baby. Regardless, I wanted to clean him up, but I didn't have anything with me. I asked if she had any wipes in her car or anything I could use to get the now dried blood off of him. She continued to blankly stare at me. Her glare was emotionless. Her stony mouth began to open, almost creaking as her lips separated. "Now we can be together again," Emily muttered. I asked her what she meant, but she remained silent and frozen. There was no way that this chance meeting was going to change my mind. After all the hurt I had been processing on my way here, I just couldn't forget that pain and let things go back to normal. I asked again if she was okay, and her mouth split open again, but this time, the words that she spoke were not her own. "You are not the only traveller who has yet to pay his debt. But when your time comes, you'll be gone." Her voice was exactly like the voice I'd been hearing on the radio and outside my car. Her lips never moved as she said them. Her mouth just hung open, and the words came out like a pre-recorded message, playing back from inside of her. I reached out to touch her hand to see if she would snap out of it, but as soon as my hand connected with her, I was back in my old college dorm room. I would remember this place anywhere. I spent 3 of my 4 years in college in this pale blue room, sitting on this twin-sized bed looking out that window at the students walking to class. Chet and I used to make up stories about what each of them would be majoring in, or which ones were just here because of Mummy and Daddy's money. We would make up dialogue and laugh about the ridiculous fictional lives we'd created for them. I had some great times in this dorm, playing golf with Chet or listening to him rattle off the latest poem he'd written. Chet always wanted to be a writer, and don't get me wrong, some of his poems were brilliant, while others were just the ramblings of a free-spirited college kid. That never stopped him though. However, The most captivating memory I had in this dorm room was of the day I asked Emily to be my girlfriend. I remember she was on her way back from class that morning. She had biology on Fridays, and the lab was right beside my dorm. I asked her to come by after. She had no idea I was about to ask her to make things official. I'd made mini pizzas in a crappy old toaster oven, making sure to cook them a little less than usual because that thing burned everything it cooked. She thought we were just having a snack and hanging out between classes, but I had been rehearsing what to say all week. I paced back and forth in that dorm room waiting for her to knock on my door. I snapped out of my daydream and back to reality, looking over to the dormitory door, where I currently sat. The knocking was almost on cue, and my stomach sank as I walked to the doorway. I looked out the peephole, but there was no one outside. The hallway appeared to be empty and quiet. I returned back to the bed and sat there unnerved. How the heck did I end up here? The door thundered again, louder this time, as I walked towards it, but still no one was on the other side of that peephole. I unlatched the door and looked out into the hallway and down both sides of the corridor. There was no sign of a person anywhere. I rationalised that it was my imagination playing tricks on me, or, even more feasibly, I just fell asleep in the car or something. This was probably all a dream. I pondered for a moment if you can wake yourself up from a dream if you know that you are dreaming. I closed the door, standing there thinking about all that was going on. Was I really losing my mind? I returned to the bed and I closed my eyes, trying to calm my worried mind and wake myself from this nightmare. The knocking started again, and this time shaking the door from the force behind each hit. I debated not answering or even moving, but I wanted to wake up or get back to my car. I had to do something. I was angry to say the least, but I needed answers. I stormed towards the door again, looking out of the peephole at the empty hallway. However, this time it appeared that the fog from the highway was starting to cloud the passageway. I violently threw open the door and peered out into a wall of thick fog. It had now covered the length of the hallway and the walls were completely hidden. Just then, I heard the sound of the toaster oven ding to my right as I turned away from the doorway to look at it. The smoky fog began to flood the room as I neared the toaster oven door. Pulling the handle, I could see that inside lay a group of small, scorched black mini pizzas. I stared in amazement at the tiny burnt pizzas positioned in front of me like a delusion from my past sent to torment me. I remember Emily laughing at the burnt mini pizzas the day I asked her to be my girlfriend. I was so nervous when I asked her, stumbling over my words. She blushed knowing what I wanted to say, but she refused to respond until I finally mustered the courage to shakily murmur, "Will you be my girlfriend?" Seeing the charred remains of love's lost froze me in place, at least until I felt a cold, frail hand brush against the corner of my shirt, moving along the contour of my back, up to my right shoulder, sending chills down my spine and filling me with apprehension. I heard a voice behind me, but the voice was soft and affectionate. It was warm and familiar. In fact, it was a voice I'd heard countless times before. It belonged to Emily. "Of course I'll be your girlfriend. I'm surprised it took you this long." the voice trailed off. I braced myself to turn and face her, but I knew I wasn't ready to see her. Here, of all places. I breathed deeply and pivoted slowly. As I turned, I caught a glimpse of the indescribable blasphemy whose emaciated fingers slid down my arm as I moved. I leapt back in panic, hitting my leg off the nightstand where the toaster oven sat, and covered my mouth with both hands when I saw it. That warm, familiar voice may have been Emily's, but the horror in front of me was not. Not in the physical sense, at least. My eyes blinked rapidly, trying to focus on the being I saw standing before me. It was a dark entity shrouded in shadow as the fog around it cascaded down its long, slender body. The creature had thin, gangling limbs that hung at its sides, and sharp, talon-like appendages protruded from the visible joints between the upper and lower parts of its extremities. The monster was fixated on me with its faded eyes. They looked like cracked pieces of charcoal and was sunken deep into the creature's head. To say that it had a blank stare or an empty face would be an understatement. I looked into the face of the creature, but it was utterly nothingness. I recognized this monster, the creature I'd thought I'd seen earlier in the fog. This beast had been following me for years, as I recalled the way it feeds on my insecurities. It eats away at the very things that I fear, knowing when I am vulnerable. This creature can't help itself from hiding just out of sight and using the things that I love, the things that I fear, my anxious thoughts, to manifest its nightmares. I've known this tormentor for quite some time, and I only see its cruel face when I am alone. That's when it hit me. All the memories came flooding back. The memories of Chet that my mind had tried so hard to suppress, to protect me. Tears streamed down my face as I glared at this abomination, thinking of all those nights that I had watched it wander down the hallway to my dormitory and hide in the darkness beside my bed. Standing there, watching me cry over the death of my best friend. All those times it visited me when my mind drifted to places it shouldn't go. Lying in bed, grieving the loss of my roommate, all alone in our empty dorm room. I never talked to anyone about how much it affected me. Chet and I used to have so much fun together and were always there for each other. But, if I'm honest with myself, when we would go and climb the rocks and play our music, we never talked about what was hurting us. We just complained about our circumstances while trying to escape the hurt for a bit. And I didn't even know he was hurting as bad as he was. I hadn't thought about his suicide in years, and truthfully, I blocked out his death. It was too traumatic to face or deal with, and my mind had sort of built a wall around his memorial. No wonder I got stuck in this room. All the heartache of my life began here. This sadistic monstrosity always knew that I could see it, but I couldn't comprehend it, and therefore gained power in my uncertainty, from my sadness and through my misery. It wears my grief like a royal robe and grows stronger the more I convince myself that I am trapped here. I couldn't allow myself to be controlled or manipulated by my own insecurities and mistakes any longer. I hurled myself from the wall I was using for support and made my way towards this monster. The room became filled with the voice from the highway. You are not the only traveller who has yet to pay his debt. But when your time comes, you'll be gone. The voice repeated the words, now overlapping each other as the malevolent choir echoed down the hallway. The sound was deafening, and I plugged my ears with my hands. The fog began to disperse around the room like tiny whirlwinds. They knocked me to the ground. You can't use my grief against me anymore, I shouted at the beast. You can't manipulate me with my pain any longer. The creature leaned in closer to me in an attitude of rage, unhinging its jaw and releasing a piercing screech. By now the fog had gotten so thick that the room was pitch black, and the force of the wind in the room made it impossible to move. I couldn't even see the monster anymore in the midst of the chaos. I heard a new voice sounding, though. This too was familiar, but not Emily's. The voice belonged to Chet, and as he spoke, the winds died down. Alone I came into this world, alone I'll depart. The only thing gained was a broken heart. The darkness faded around me as the tears dried on my cheeks. The fog began to diminish, and I could see the road beneath my feet. I turned to acknowledge my surroundings, seeing that my car sat just feet from where I stood. The sun began its ascent over the horizon, sending light to destroy what remained of this hazy darkness. I stood there as a silhouette in the sun's golden rays, feeling at peace, a peace I hadn't felt in so long. It's true that this trip was nothing more than another attempt to hide from the heartaches I felt. I had lied to myself for so long about Chet's death that I'd even created the delusion that he was still there. It was time to face one last ghost from my grief-stricken past. I walked to my car, reaching for the passenger door. The handle was cold as I gripped its sturdy frame and opened the door. I gently removed a folded up sheet of paper with a cassette tape cradled inside the fold from within the glove box. I had found these items on my bed in our dorm room the morning Chet died, but I had refused to ever open them because I knew that they were from him. Emily had often encouraged me to read the note or listen to the tape as a way to perhaps gain some closure. Instead, I just handed them over to the police as evidence and tried to forget about the whole thing. The night I received the test results from my ultrasound in the mail, finding out that Emily was not pregnant with my child, was the same night this letter and cassette were returned to me by the police. They had deemed Chet's death a suicide, and the letter helped solidify it a bit better. I couldn't cope with the idea of reading it, so I hid it in the car as a feeble attempt to keep lying to myself that Chet wasn't gone. It was finally time to read this note and close the book on what feels like the darkest chapter of my life. As I unfolded the paper and began to read Chet's final words, I couldn't help but feel my stomach drop. The letter was short, just a single sentence long. I have left you with one last tape, buddy. I'm sorry you had to find it this way. Not exactly the closure I had anticipated, but I knew the time had come to listen to his tape. I plugged the cassette into the car radio, and the true resolution I had needed was found in Chet's own voice. His voice was full of pain, and just hearing him speak brought back the hurt of losing him. Through the tears of sorrow, I listened as Chet read the words of the poem he had written, the last poem he would ever write, intended specifically for me. Alone I came into this world, alone I'll depart. the only thing gained was a broken heart. I know we grew close through the years in the dorms, but life has put me through one too many storms. The depression I have felt is too hard to describe. Though your friendship has helped, these thoughts won't subside. I've been haunted too long by the ghosts of my past. When this night is through, it will be my last. I know you will hate this and won't understand why, but it's not about you, and I don't want you to try. I'm just here to thank you for being a friend, even though my journey has come to its end. You're not the only traveller who has yet to pay his debt. My payment is due from these years of regret, but when your time comes, you'll be gone. So don't cleave to what is already withdrawn. I sobbed as his trembling voice faded from the tape, but I was finally free to mourn his death. His words certainly offered some closure that I had long deprived myself of. However, they also carried with them a lot of hurt. I marched somberly over to the driver's side door of my El Camino, gripping his note and the cassette tightly in my hand, thinking about all the chances I'd wasted to talk to Chet, wishing I could have the chance now. I sat in the seat, processing a mixture of regrets and a newfound feeling of finality, still struggling to understand how the previous night's events transpired, and if I truly lived through that experience just to bring me to this moment of clarity. The creature had been speaking words from Chet's poem, but how could it have just been a figment of my imagination? There would be no explanation for the use of those phrases, considering that I'd never heard Chet's poem until moments ago. Not even my subconscious mind could play those kinds of tricks on me. Reaching for my car keys, I started the engine, surprised by the sound of the radio as the vehicle came to life. I had grown so accustomed to the sound of the static fuzz that hearing the music through that old radio seemed like a foreign concept. As the song ended, I listened attentively as the news reporter's voice resonated from my speakers. I recognised it immediately as the gruff-sounding voice continually repeating the cryptic phrases from Chet's poem the previous night. He introduced himself as a credible news anchor, expressing the importance of this breaking news story and encouraging anyone with further information to contact the local police. The man described a young woman who was found late last night on the side of the road, mere feet from where I currently stood. She had been involved in a car accident while on her way to the hospital with her boyfriend to deliver their baby. A car had swerved into their lane, almost colliding with the side of their vehicle and causing them to veer off the road. The woman was found wandering along the guardrails alone, carrying her newborn baby. The girl's boyfriend was pronounced dead at the scene of the accident. Police are now searching for more information about the driver of the automobile that swerved into their lane, causing the accident. I sat there motionless in a cold sweat, staring blankly at the radio dial. It felt like I had been physically stabbed by the reporter's words. It was Emily. I knew it was Emily. I had been there. I saw her last night when I thought I was hallucinating in the fog. She was traumatized that night. I could have helped her, but instead I found myself trapped in some torturous vision quest with the ghosts of my past. Was the clarity that I received from this nightmare really worth the price of Emily's safety? I was the car. I was the one that cut them off in traffic. I was the catalyst behind this whole situation. My mind was racing. I could feel the blood rushing to my head. I forced myself to switch off the radio. As I moved, I could see in my peripheral vision that there was something in my rearview mirror. I looked closely at the reflection in the mirror as terror gripped me once more. With each breath I took, I watched the dark figure take another step closer towards the car. My head started to throb as the sound of the voices swarmed outside of the car, and the speakers hummed with the haunting chorus. You are not the only traveller who has yet to pay his debt. But when your time comes, you'll be gone. Now, isn't it wonderful what the mind can do when you're all alone? Even travellers and wanderers find themselves all alone. Who knows what's in the deepest, darkest recesses of the mind? Still, I'm sure you are just fine. So, until we meet again, I am the Wanderer. Do take care now, won't you?